Brother Moses, man, just gonna grace you with the presence just a little bit in response to this thing that I'm still having a conversation on. Here's where I'm gonna start. Mr. Senator, a word, please. When they say beating out Judge Joe Brown, whose program lasted 15 seasons, what do they mean by that? How do you compare records, Judge Joe Brown and Judge Mathis? What would you want to know? Because I'd want to know something about the administration of their duties. Here's an example of an administration of duties. On February 1898, Serena Payne, the chairman of the Committee on Merchant, Marine, and Fisheries, wrote a letter to George Ray, the chairman of the Committee on Invalid Pensions, on behalf of Harriet Tubman. In the letter, he testified that she was employed as a nurse, cook, and spy. The purpose of the letter was to propose an increase to the $8 pension she was receiving as a widow instead of the previous bill, H.R. 2711, that requested a lump sum payment of $1,800, 1898. It acknowledged the previous bill that included all original documentation and presented to the Committee on War Claims by General McClellan. Images below. On January 19, 1899, Bill H.R. 4982 proposed an increase of her current pension to $25 a month for her services as a nurse in the U.S. Army. February 7, 1899, the Senate report in response to Bill H.R. 4982 determined that the Committee of Pensions objected the increase to $25. While acknowledging her service and dedication to the country as a nurse, it argued that the number of nurses on the pension roll at a higher rate than $12 a month is very few, and that there are no valid reasons why Tubman should receive a pension of $25 a month, which would open pension increases. The Committee of Pensions instead decided that her widow pension would be increased to $20 a month, in consideration of her personal services to the country. Senate report response to Bill H.R. 4982. All the way to the last part, $20 a month in consideration of her personal services to the country. That's one heck of a precedent in 1899. So how do you evaluate the record of judges? People who are determining the life and the quality of life for individuals. Judges who are determining decisions and payments for things like healthcare. And when people are old, they at least deserve an explanation. So let's take a look at a couple of situations where they're owed at least an explanation. Similar to the images that you saw posted on the New York Times and still can see of the poisoning of an entire generation. do that, I'm gonna take a quick break, take a gander at my phone, make sure that this stream is even live. I don't think it is. Hang on, dude. Side phone. Because if it is, sir, Mr. Senator, and when I say Mr. Senator, I would be having the conversation with the Tim Scott, Congress.gov, Library of Congress, who sits on the House Republican Steering Committee to the Committee on Transportation and the Committee on Small Business. Later appointed to the Committee of Rules and relinquished that 2 other assignments. You know, the one for transportation, vital infrastructure spending, and that Committee on Small Business, also vital. Critical responsibilities. I don't know why you would give those seats up. I would be talking to the Tim Scott, politician, business person who relinquished the seat for small business, who's a partner to Lindsey Graham of the Republican Party there in South Carolina and attended college at the Presbyterian College. That Tim Scott. Wouldn't really want to know how old Tim Scott is, but I would want to understand a little bit more about the last 3 bills he sponsored. That's first information on judging a judge. What do you judge a judge by, if not the decisions they make? And on critical cases, such as the one posted here, the poisoning of an entire American city. Toxic water, sick kids, and the incompetent leaders who betrayed Flint. I'd have questions there. Peace, Kevin Brown. This is a story, truth and inclusion in the know. With technology similar to those that can provide a weather forecast accurately, that will impact the millions of travelers. Those on the roads, as well as those in the skies, and those who stayed in one community. Let me back up. Qualifying thing, statement has to be made. Brother Moses, project manager, and a high-level thing. A word, please, Mr. Senator. When I think of project management, I think of Eventbrite and a type of events that can be held to support small businesses and those entrepreneurs highly targeted in a certain area. And the creation of such events, such as through the platform Eventbrite, where you can build it yourself. And it's going to ask you a series of questions on what type of event you want to create. So I don't know why you would give up those, especially when some of the categories of events that can be held include community and culture, family and education. Now, some of the more popular ones could be the food and drink. There's services for that. And those services link to small businesses. So I think that's a good seat to hold command over. And thus I started with this story about HR 4982, which was about Harriet Tubman. I link it to some of the more comic conversations around, what did Judge Joe Brown say? And why is he so patriarchal? And I take it away from the gender role and pull it, I take it away from the gender war conversation and put it back on just the premise of $20 bill with the face of Harriet Tubman on there. And I look for the precedent. But if I have to have a conversation, I would have to have that conversation with the senator. Mr. Senator, sir. And I would want to know about policy like the last 3 bills you may have signed. And I would want to know how they match up against other policies. It's only fair if we keep those policies to the modern day. What do you vote on now, and which of your policies, and what those policies compare to? And that's one way of looking at it that I respect. But I gotta dig back in history and see how it lines up at critical junctures. Trademark policy. Mr. Senator, sir. And I know that it's available by looking at places such as Senate documents. Mr. Senator, a word, please. Add a widget to start building your dashboard. On that widget, what would you want to have displayed? If your task was to present information on the African American Progress Report for the year 2020, what would your Census Bureau questionnaire ask, and what would information do for you? Mr. Senator, sir. Credibility statement so the sirs don't come off as condescending or disingenuous. I am a veteran, and my bloodline are veterans. And if there's any great way of having the credibility is saying the service to others, which you'll see demonstrated here in these slides on your screen. Engage with customers on Google for free. With a Google My Business account, you get more than a business listing. Your free business profile lets you easily connect with customers across Google Search and Maps. And it's something that each small business can own on their own. And so creating that database exists already. I don't know why Mr. Senator would give up that seat. And to whom was it given to? Whom was it assigned? Because I am Brother Moses, and when it comes to smart sheets, there's an app for that. There's an app for that allows small businesses to work together. And they can invite people within their network into that smart sheet. And on working together, generate shared income and those taxes, as Mr. Senator would like to tout as a victory, as an accomplishment. I think that's all I got. Let's see. I don't think this one plays. Nah, this one don't be playing at all. And if you're going to have the conversation about the good brother whose case is being heard at the Supreme Court, remember the importance of a national forecast and the Weather Channel and its global implications. All right, man. So the question that I would want to ask is, what would an African American progress report look like for the year 2020? And whom would I have that conversation? It would probably be with leaders of the NAACP. It would probably be with the Congressional Black Caucus, and it would also be with the Black Chamber of Commerce. If I was your senatorial aide, or if I was that Mr. Senator that I was actually projecting to in that rant that I just had. But Mr. Senator, a word, please, is typically followed by a response. Thank you. Yes, sir. Man, I'm wondering, can y'all even hear the music in the chat? Is it even playing for you or not? Let me see if I change it up. Will it change anything in the response rate? All right, man, if I turn that off, does that change the way this microphone is coming across? Peace. Nigga, you know a nigga name. I'm trying to see what's up, man. Peace, and I'm rocking with you. Let's see, do I even have one of these that I want to actually throw up there? Do I want to debate it, or do I just want to have a conversation? Man, neither, really. But I do wonder whether or not this music is coming through clear. See, that's the difference when you got subscribers. I knocked that one already. Let's see this shit. Yeah, peace to the chat. I'm fucking around for a little second, man. Thanks for rocking. If you're there. That way. Cancel that one. Help create a revolutionary understanding. Oh shit, what's that? Give me a sec. I'll be right back. Oh. Yeah, forgive me, man. Just got back for a little road trip. I'm gonna let the mic get hot a little bit, and then we're gonna go in. Is that what the black media is supposed to be reporting? Videos of the Trump lynching tweet? Peace, bro, Gab. Peace, P1. Lynching in America makes the case that lynching of African Americans was terrorism, a widely supported phenomenon used to enforce racial subordination and segregation. Lynchings were violent and public events that traumatized Black people throughout the country and were largely tolerated by state and federal officials. Lynching in America confronting the legacy of racial, race-based legislation is what they would probably talk about. And others would probably take a little bit deeper and talk about those vigilance committees that were actually created. You can see those. You can also find the definition of what it is. I'm just going to assume that you already understand that vigilance committees is an 18th century and 19th century enforced concept of banding together and enacting violence. If you want it from a Black perspective, you would try to understand the Maroon societies. And if you understand the Maroon societies, then you can also understand the mulatto societies and the other societies that are all competed for resources at a time. And there's different information sources out there that'll tell you where some of those committees were brought together and what some of their terrorism was. I actually do want to talk about this road trip. Run upstairs and grab my ashtray and bring it down. It's in there with Auntie's Nia. Damn, where did I end up? In the ocean? We drove west, but we didn't hit the ocean. Could have. That weather report was bad trying to get all the way through San Diego. It was bloodshot red. Oh, this is the map. This ain't my other one. My other one, I could whip that map. Let me see if I can get that one up. Because the type of skill set that Brother Moses brings is one of these. Just one. And a conversation was brought up while I was on YP's channel a little bit earlier of a space program. Question was around, Should African Americans have their own space program, have their own NASA? And I thought it was an interesting question. And in fact, in a debate terms, I would say, yeah. And it made me do a little research again. Like always, it challenges me when I find a good question in the air, which is why I'm on so many different channels. Like with a lot of information. And out of all the information that I heard, that one was the most feasible. And so I said, damn, what would you do? Yeah. You would want to know whether or not African Americans have their own satellites. And in order to answer that question, the only person you could probably ask it to is the person who owns the Weather Channel. But power talks to power. No others need apply. Where was the ashtray, nephew? Huh? The ashtray. It's like a black cup. Oh. Appreciate it. And so having conversations with me seem out of this world sometimes because I think from a global view. I do come from a Pan-Africanist lens that says the world is bigger than that. I'll read some of the headers here just to provide that information. Automated object detection from imagery, cloud-based imagery exploitation, commercial, complex logistics, cyber defense, environmental health and safety, food development and packaging, hosted payloads. I even like the sensor payload development on the right side. Above it, science and research management, plan, train, fly. All of those are good programs to have. And so it drove me to do some research. When I pull out from my research, the 5 countries in Africa that have space programs, but African Americans don't have one. Well, that would be a question for the owner of the Weather Channel. Thank you, nephew. Mr. Senator, sir, that and other conversations around topics like opportunities to link reparations to the descendants of the freedmen are very important. And I think those conversations are worth having. And I also believe that you have access to the people who those conversations are worth having with. And let me read my next report as Black Media. From freedmen.umd.edu, no event in American history matches the drama of emancipation. More than a century later, it continues to stir the deep emotions, and properly so. In the United States, emancipation accompanied the defeat of the world's most powerful slaveholding class and freed a larger number of slaves than did the end of slavery in all other New World societies combined. Clothed in the rhetoric of biblical prophecy and national destiny, and born of a bloody civil war, it accomplished a profound social revolution. The Freedmen and Southern Society Project was established in 1976 to capture the essence of that revolution by depicting the drama of emancipation in the words of the participants, liberated slaves and defeated slaveholders, soldiers and civilians, common folk, and the elite, Northerners and Southerners. Drawing upon the rich resources of the National Archives of the United States, the project's editors poured over millions of documents, selecting some 50,000. So there's 950,000 more documents to be digitized, is what that tells me. They are presently transcribed, organized, and annotating them to explain how Black people traversed the bloody ground from slavery to freedom between the beginning of the Civil War in 1861 and the beginning of radical Reconstruction in 1867. We want those documents, Mr. Senator, sir. And while you may have access to the people, we want that information. The documents vividly speak for themselves in interpretive essays by the editors and provide that historical context for reparations and restorative justice claim. ADOS. The documents convey with first-person immediacy the experiences of the liberated, the quiet, personal satisfaction of meeting an old master on equal terms, outrage, being ejected from a segregated streetcar, the elation of a fugitive slave enlisting in the Union Army, and the humiliation of a laborer cheated out of hard-earned wages. Insert Moses Jenkins from a previous source, Harriet Tubman's check, and that $20 bill, where I showed you the source. Maybe I was too quiet, or maybe it was too calm. It was too slow for people. They needed that energy fast. But I gave it. And so some free resources, as you see on the screen from the source that I provided at the beginning, and I'll do so again here, friedman.umd.edu, and then it's /index. And those are the stories that you can get from even the freedmen. In these stories, we would have to have qualifying data from economists. And one of the highest ranking economists, Thomas Sowell, is not requesting this information and otherwise saying that this information is irrelevant. And I disagree on that level of governance. Like I also disagree with some judicial level of governance decisions by our current sitting representative of the people. And so from that level, I have conversations out loud. Mr. Senator, a word, please, this one being directed to Tim Scott. And while I would much rather be having conversations about space capabilities, I am comfortable also digging into those national archives. Yes, sir. And finding those manuscript records of the African American experience. And I'm just as passionate with that research as brothers who study comedic science. And I'm just as passionate as those who debunk NASA in general and claim that the earth is flat. And I'm just as passionate, probably, as that old minister in the Southern Baptist tradition. Because in those publications by those freedmen, you can find documents, historical records and accounts in some of the most trivial time periods experienced by human beings. Time period, of course, again being 1861 to 1867. Salute to the University of Maryland for generating a new appreciation for those treasures, those archives, those records that demonstrate the complexity of the emancipation process. And follow me Follow me back by subscribing. But some of the type of conversations that we could always have include those about middle class economics. Having a discussion, 15 minutes on your calendar to open it up with 20 questions, back and forth, rapid fire for 15 minutes. That's a hell of a conversation. And it's a good, appropriate use of time. Hopefully some would agree as to why I generate such content, such as the one presented here, which is Middle Class Economics B1 Network, delivering content, giving you a view into the mind of Brother Moses. It's a little bit slower than that New York or that up north. Might not be as fiery as that Philly, but it's an available content for your consumption. And you can follow it back. Follow me by hitting that subscribe button. And today is Black Friday. I think I need to wait for Cyber Monday to see if what I need, which is a faster, more articulate hard drive to process at the rate I process information, then these conversations could probably be held in real time. But I admit again, the way my mind works, it does take a bit of an interconnecting web, a spider's web capability, a Black Spider-Man superhero type of technological empowerment in order to follow. Am I talking too fast or is my computer listening too slow? Let that sink in. How do you evaluate a judge? When it says here, beating out Judge Joe Brown, whose program lasted 15 seasons, what does that really mean? Can you judge them on their record? Gregory Ellis Mathis, born April 5th, 1960, is a retired Michigan 36th District Court judge turned arbiter of the daytime Emmy Award-winning syndicated reality courtroom show, Judge Mathis. Produced in Chicago, Illinois. His program has been on the air since September 13th, 1999, and entered its 20th season beginning on Monday, September 3rd, 2018. Emanating from the success of his Venerable Courtroom series, Mathis also has made a name for himself as a prominent leader within the Black American community, as a Black culture motivational speaker. Tell me more. Just think I asked it, what does a motivational speaker mean? No, I want to know about Judge Mathis's motivational speaking engagements. I know they're just talking about ratings here, but I'm way deeper than that. I want to know about your sentencing when it came to Black men. If you believe Black men should have been held to a higher standard, then what was your sentencing like comparatively? That is the record that I would want to judge who beat out who on. His activism. Well, the development of community gardens is important. In Detroit, displaced residents still waiting. His highlights, 20th season, his people's summary, Black Achievement Award recipient. That's dope. American people of Cuban descent. That's dope. It's got some good links. Look, you had a whole choir behind him for his outstanding community work. Each year, Oakland University Church recognizes an individual who has made a significant contribution to enhance the lives of other African Americans. This year's recipient of the Black History Achievement Award is Judge Greg Mathis. Judge Mathis is known for his no-nonsense and quick courtroom humor as he passes his judgment for numerous small claims cases presented during his self-entitled reality courtroom show, Judge Mathis. The former school dropout, drug dealer, gang member, and jail inmate has become one of the most respected and inspirational figures of our time. With a past like this, who would have thought that this Detroit native would have, let's say, become a judge? While incarcerated, Judge Mathis's mother was dying with cancer and was granted an early probation to help care for her. During the time, he also promised that he would turn his life around. Keeping his promise after she passed, Judge Mathis began his journey to become the man he is today. After receiving his GED with the help of cousin Addison Hines, who was dear to him, Judge Mathis enrolled in the Eastern Michigan University. My cousin and mentor who attended Eastern Michigan University made sure I got enrolled, Judge Mathis shared. After graduating from law school, he became the youngest judge in Michigan's history and served as a Superior Court judge for Michigan's 36th district. As Judge Mathis continued to share his story, he encouraged the congregation, particularly the students, by stating, "Don't think that you can't be successful with a GED." Out of 365 days per year, Judge Mathis spends 100 days taping his reality television show. The other 265 days spent with his family and crisscrossing the country, trying to uplift the African American community. Proud of his event's roots, Judge Mathis gave credence to his home church, City Temple's SDA Church. Finally acknowledged the great work that Dr. Carlton Beard is doing in Oakwood. Goes on to share that the Black History Achievement Award is the most meaningful award he's received in his 18 years of television and service. Press conference consists of Oakwood students, church members, staff, and other staff from the community. Members of the Delta Theta Lambda chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Inc. were also present. Chapter's president, Robert Drake, made a presentation to Judge Mathis, who was also a member of that fraternity. During the press conference, Judge Mathis was asked if he could go back in time, what would he have done differently? And would that change alter where he is now? Judge Mathis responded, "If I go back in time, the only thing I would do differently is cause less pain to others. My destructive behavior caused a lot of pain to other people. My journey, in my opinion, was preparation for leadership in that area that was most essential during this time. That is uplifting troubled street youth and Black men in particular, sending a message of hope and inspiration." Judge Mathis responded, "Had I not had that journey and those challenges and the consequences thereof, I would not be in a position to speak authentically about it." That's all he got. Good little story. So that's a little back history on Judge Mathis. So it's a little bit more one-sided. I'm not just sitting there being critical of Judge Mathis and also Judge Joe Brown, but in context of why would I even have a comment to in response to a Judge Joe Brown comment, both of them being patriarchal type people who want to have conversations with men, and particularly Black men, and who call themselves motivational speakers as they move throughout the community, having these conversations, many times having those conversations from a seat of judgment on Black men. And that judgment being Black men, y'all ain't shit, has a presence. And it has a presence inside those Black churches where he can deliver those messages. But it also resonates amongst those students. And I say those who may have been a part of that Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated brotherhood may have opened doors for him along the way to deliver his content as a motivational speaker on those 265 traveling days. I won't just judge him by the content of his show, but in those 265 days, in order to have a deeper understanding, I would want access. I tried to even click the link here live to access that information in real time with those people who already follow and subscribe and think this information is important. I say, Mr. Senator, a word, please. And when I have these content streams, it is a view into the lens of the mind of Brother Moses. It is as political, as radical, as liberal as one might describe it, but it is absolutely on that level. It does take into consideration race-based legislation and its positive impacts on the economy as a whole. And because those conversations can be so pivotal but so convoluted, I address them to that mind, like saying, Mr. Senator, sir, and having that in the tag. And if it is a trigger or a tag and the name being used that hits him in his radar, then that conversation is probably for Tim Scott. Trying to rewind this. I'm trying to give you this content, but it is not allowing it to come up. So I'm gonna try again, man. It's been 45 minutes of this thing thinking about delivering on the order that I asked it to execute. And have a great day from Conscious Moon and to Conscious all over. Let this information resonate. Let it strike a chord in your consciousness, one that can take that global perspective, that 40,000-foot view, and have the conversation from there and the time that it takes to elevate and land a plane. And in having that conversation over a 45-minute space, what details would have been discussed? I would ask that those presented in this live stream be considered, because they are vital to the infrastructure of our American dream. I like the idea of those conceptual frameworks created by one of my favorite cartoons, being the Jetsons. And you can see the influence of the Jetsons even as I communicate via a live YouTube screen platform now. And the only difference is I don't have my camera on, but I do turn my camera on. And that influence is something that can be taken from the conceptual framework of my favorite cartoon, the Jetsons. And even at the time, though, my favorite cartoon may have also been Thundercats and Panthera. If y'all remember who that is. I think those are the connecting pieces that drive home these conversations. I would have them with my elders, and they often would hear my intonations and say, if you don't take some of that bass out of your voice when you address an authority on these matters. I would have those conversations with the authority on those matters, and I would stick to the talking points. And to others, it may seem a bit convoluted, I get you that. But I am Brother Moses, and this is my content, and this is a lens that I speak from. From a B1 Network reparations debate lens, I would have to project onto my opponent the authority of a Tim Scott, the Republican senator, the gentleman from South Carolina. And while I used to would have watched Panthera, today I would watch C-SPAN if I had cable. I don't have cable, so my connection is actually, and following me, I think, actually gives you access to some of my liked content. And if you look through my liked content, there you will find, I think I made it public for you to find access to some of the greatest minds delivering information in the year 2019. I don't think that you'll scroll back even further than that, but just starting there. And a similar thread of information that you'll find being presented in the videos that I've liked are informations that resonate right here. And I'm only here for that intelligent conversation. And everything else, I'll be quiet and listen. As we move more koi-san and koi fish, products, living creatures, and things that enhance and provide substance. To be honest, if you're not on that intellectual level, Brother Moses probably talks right over your head, because I do admit that I struggle with social anxiety or being able to land that 40,000 foot view and have just a basic conversation that works to erase that stigma about mental health and racism in our society. I do believe that we can do it together, though, which is why I always recommend never to struggle alone. If you're struggling with some of these thoughts, I would implore you to consider joining and subscribing that Patreon community that is the B1 Network, because we deliver content from a Black perspective. Like the video. As we deliver that content, remember, the mission is to get more koi fish and more koi-san. Message. It is a social media networking online community, as so predicted. I won't argue against that. I won't say that that's a bad thing. I just say when you hit the chat, check in and let's see where the conversation goes. What else can we discuss? Typical wealth calcification. That's one of the ones that are always a good topic if you run across a senator or somebody from the Caribbean. And that's a good space to have the conversation. Question mark, chicken emoji. Are you available for lunch? Wow, I labeled that the bald ego debate intro. I'm gonna give it to you one more time. Let me see if I could even turn it up a little bit for you. Click whatever value. Nah. There you go. But I'm only here for an intelligent conversation. Can you hear me now? As we move towards koi-san. Brother Moses, father, husband, Army veteran, Morehouse man, and content creator here. Man, be sure to like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. To be honest, I'm really only here to have a conversation at a high level. Everything else, I'll listen and I'll observe, and sometimes I'll even leave some troll comments there. Because I admit I struggle with social media. I have to be able to have that conversation from that 40,000 foot lens.
ForClassics.com.
To erase that stigma about mental health and racism in society. I do believe that we can do it together. And I also believe that you should never struggle alone. If someone who also struggles with that social issue, racism or Black First Matters, you ought to consider joining that B1 Network. We deliver content. Hit that Patreon. You'll see the content streamed down. It's just as accessible as any other social media platform, but you'll see the content that interconnects that dot and those perspectives. That Black media. It's right there for you. Message. As we continue to try to get the koi-san. It's a social media network and online community. I will not deny that. That is exactly what it is. And I don't see a negative in it. All I ask is that you check in.
ForClassics.com.
What else can we discuss? Wealth calcification. Particularly if you're having a conversation with somebody from the Caribbean. Question mark, chicken emoji. Do you got 15 minutes for lunch? And it's interesting that I titled that the bald ego debate. Question mark, chicken emoji. Do you have 15 minutes for lunch? That's dope. Let's see, man. I'm here. I'm kicking it. I'm live streaming. Here's some content for you. Person, I appreciate it. And I always ask for your patience because we can only move as fast as this technology is going to allow us to move forward. I think some of these videos, it tries to open up, but because of the size of the file or maybe it not having 1080p streaming, let me hold it back. So that image there goes with the conversation. The 40,000 foot is being on a plane. And if you only had the time of a conversation that it takes to land a plane, 50 minutes, what is the conversation that you would have? That is the premise again. And for that matter, who would you want to have that conversation with? For some of us, it would be a live message from Bill Cosby.
This wonderful knowledge into the 25th century when the people are still in the 21st century.
Probably still would. Man, they took all of my videos offline or my quick access to them. So it's like when I'm having a conversation, I have to find them, which is oftentimes annoying, especially since I use these visual aids in order to stimulate conversation and to drive the conversation forward. As you see, even on the backdrop, I use those as stimulation to keep me researching and opening up a lens into what I'm providing here. Is even as you look into the screen and see what is this brother doing, or what is this brother actually talking about, driving the research. And hopefully that's going to be something of some positive value for some. I don't know. For others, maybe it's not as important. For me, I think it is something that has some merit. So let me see if I can give it to you. Again, I'm only going to be able to access it and work at the rate at which this program moves, but nonetheless, it is vital information. And what are they doing? They just moved it completely out of the screen. All right. And we could start here from the left to the right as you see what miscegenation is. Those who want to engage in the conversation about gender war or miscegenation and understand what the miscegenation laws are and how they were passed, or even when they were passed over time, and then go from that conversation from the left to the right, put it in actual context with the grouping of where those people were. It was more or less a northern conversation where it was freedmen. And if that concept then moved down to where the heavy populations were, as you see here, it just wasn't a thing. In the South, where the majority of African-American men were and who they were marrying, it did not look like this image of the white man and the Becky. Those marriages and even the fight to get out of slavery were happening not because of the right for miscegenation or to date or to get closer to white women. It was black women when it came to marriage. And that's the information that we see over time and in the laws. Any other argument to the contrary is a fallacy. It's more or less just an ad hominem attack on the character of black men, but it's not one deeply rooted in that information that we have available to us. Yeah, wait, go to the next slide. Hang on, still rocking. You know, they trying to even give me one that I could create one right now if I needed to. But that's not what I'm actually trying to do, is create the whole wheel. I have a couple of items that are already ready. It's just delivering them in real time is where it starts to get a little bit convoluted. Like even today, joining the call and trying to have the conversation from what I would consider this file here, I've already created some information about what you see in the screen. It's a smaller image, which is why I already took the time to prepare it and add it to a larger screen conversation. But today we were having a conversation around what you see here on the screen, which is DNA or genetics. And being able to have that conversation from multiple lenses would allow you to see the value in it, or those cross-cultural or cross-platform collaborations with those who may be Hebrew Israelites, or those who may be Kemetic, or those who may be, you know, representing a different platform or a different worldview. Yeah. Well, we know there's other way to get that information out there. I think one of the good information platforms or way of disseminating that information is to put it on these videos that are available. Because we can have entire conversations, or we can condense them. Like this one, when we were talking about ways that we could be combating the Jim Crow era policies and bills. And so the black men opened up the legislative book. We did our research and we put it on the screen for others to have the conversation. And we begged people to challenge the other people to have the conversation from the lens of that information. That they wanted to sing and dance, and they wanted to play the whatever it is they wanted to roast. And while we were attempting to deliver content with visual aids on Jim Crow era postcards, the actual money generated, but no, the message and the symbolism and the social conditioning that occurred, those black voices that should never be forgotten. That's what we had to deal with. And when we told them that's what they were acting like, they couldn't say, damn, my bad, I am not a Why? Well, they wanted to either defend racism or they actually enjoy being that black face in white spaces. But for us, we don't like that menstrual cycle shit. We don't like that ain't saying. And we hate to see niggas acting like that lucky black nigga Americana. Like we don't know about blacks who are getting their Southern Underground Railroad tickets and ran their ass to Mexico quick. We don't know about them 5th Regiment colored folks. We don't know about the 10th Cavalry. Like we don't have that conversation in that route. And we don't know about it like it's not on the map already. Like we can't show you that information in real time. Look, this information's already there. Maybe I was talking too fast. They don't know about the air defense artillery. They don't know we already did that work. That this black man represents it at Fort Bliss even today. That we have specialists that are a part of a black space program in this defense. They don't know we had that conversation. They can't talk general Pershing with us. Nigga, the fuck do niggas think they is? Fuck. They think we're a part of the motherfucking Bill Cosby junkyard gang or something. And when we really ask them to consider the position that we have been in as the singer, the dancer, the cook, the comedian, the clown, the romantic, the soldier, and the father in America. Man, I should play that one again, man. What is it that they actually want us to accomplish here, man? Because they may have missed it. The conversation can move from DNA to lineage across platforms with Hebrew Israelites, those who follow Kemetic science, other platforms and spaces and audiences and levels of thought. And it can provide a context, it being the data, it being the exact thing that I told you we needed to kill Jim Crow, and the policies that I would want to discuss. But instead of being able to have the conversation around those policies, CB1 can come together and show you all of the information pertinent and relevant. Stacks and censuses, the people who like census will tell you I don't, but because you do, I'll give you that information. And instead of being able to use that and leverage that information, we have to have the conversation about it from a lens of racism ain't here no more. When we just have to rebut that by saying racism ain't went nowhere. Now back to the point. No, you like to be the black face and white space. And therefore you're doing the Amos and Andy together. And I don't like to be that Negro, that lucky Negro, black Americana. See, today we talked about it from the Underground Railroad where African Americans could get to Mexico. And what did that look like in the early 1800s? But they don't know we know this history. They can't talk about the 5th Colored Regiment. They can't talk about those 10th Cavalry. They can't talk about our Buffalo Soldiers. They can't put it on a map families with the legacy of those Buffalo Soldiers. They can't see it from 1860 to the 1900s. They don't know this has already been presented, that it's here today in the air defense artillery for the U.S. Army. They can't look at the brothers like Specialist Williams and see the THAAD training, intercontinental ballistic missile system that protects us intergalactically. They can't talk about General Pershing. Why? Because they want to dance. They think we're a part of this Bill Cosby junkyard gang. Why don't they know this, Brother George Macon? Why don't they know this, Great Black Shark? And if we showed them the information about our veterans and all the different roles we played as singer and dancer and soldier, clown and comedian and romantic and father, we have work to do. I wonder why I named that the Coon video. Maybe it is when I felt insulted. And I'm wondering why it's not allowing me to give you the information to rebuttal rather than feel. It's not allowing me to give you the rebuttal. It's only allowing me to give you the feelings. I mean, maybe they're one and the same, and the information as presented is more than enough. Maybe somebody listening to just that segment caught it, and they were on that level. And thus it has been presented, and it is. And so it is, as so it was said, Brother Moses. Perfect timing. That's not the one. That has no content developed already inside of it. I've created one that has the content and the interconnecting websites that substantiate the claims that I make. So it makes for a better pro-Black or Pan-African debate. I'll say that again. It makes for a better pro-Black or Pan-African debate. I'll give it to you a third time. Pan-African or pro-Black debate. Damn, I think I got it wrong like 2 or 3 times, but as it is said, it has thus been provided. Damn. Why they hating on a player, man? All right, so give it a pivot, give it a moment, and it will get to the next section. I'm not as smooth in my transitions as I would like to be. And of course, you hear the bitch ass excuse that I'm throwing out there economically or as a content creator wise, which is to blame it on the technology. Hell, if the conversation starts to die off or it gets a little bit slow, maybe it is the technology. But most content creators that I follow don't need too many visual aids, and others are already upskilled enough to include their content that they want to discuss inside of their conversation. And so no lack there. It is still the development of the skill set, which is why if you look at some of my earlier content, it was me just even learning how to even create these in the first place, and then how to share them, and then actually sharing them. And then today that skill set has been developed and I have actually created them, now that I'm trying to launch it, it is failing me. But you live and you learn, man. You live and you learn, man. Peace and salute. And I'm gonna hit the X and tell it, all right, you weren't able to bring up the information that I was requesting. Let me move forward towards requesting a different information then. And the computer is just like, huh? It's like, nah, maybe I'm talking too fast or it's listening too slow. Either way, the information is being put on a delay, but it's still going to be thought-provoking if you rock with it and if you follow it. This is the one that I would prefer to present here, which is middle-class economics. because inside of this one, I have the 20 questions to test whether you're pro-Black, and there are a healthy set of questions for examination. And so I appreciate it. If you have time, please rock with your boy. Appreciate it, and thanks for logging on. And again, this B1 Network, man, is because we have work to do. This information won't be for everybody. It is on a high level, and I never assume that the people who I present the information prefer the clowning and the joking. Now, sometimes I do understand where it moves towards the clowning and the joking, and so I can rock with it, and people like to be entertained. But if I'm going to have a conversation that is going to be in perpetuity attached to my name, Brother Moses, I would want that information or that communication to be edifying. And thus I try to deliver some good content, and I'm trying to get to the frequency or the fluidity is what I would like to say of some of those content creators who I admire. And we know some of those content creators to be the Sonetta TVs and the House of Consciousness community, their entire network of interconnected channels that you can subscribe to and like and watch and consume, as well as the Manosphere ODJ, who is a GOAT in my book, and the interconnected network that is also available to be liked and followed and subscribed to. Definite shout out to one exclusively there would be that sector that would identify itself as the Black Brain Trust and their interconnected group of other specialists. See, that network within the network is what I see when you look at this screen, which is why I provide that information thus accordingly. Damn, this mug is still not giving me the bread and butter that I would like to see. But if I was to go into it, I would say there are about 20 questions to test whether you're pro-Black, and I would provide that from the perspective of B1 Network. We deliver content. One of those questions being, is abortion murder? You would take some time there and you would examine it. And as we continue to enrich this content, we're able to interact quickly and take sentiment polls and things. And those who respond in that rapid rate, see, I don't have to talk so fast, they'd be listening slow. They would have their either black fist up if they agree that that is a pro-Black concept. If they think that it's on that spectrum, they'd be able to slide that indicator to the left, and that would indicate where they think that perspective falls. Black, how would you view it? Abortion being murder. And that's a conversation piece. So I could give you about 20 of those bad boys, 20 questions to test whether you're pro-Black. Another one would be about the topic of wealth and abundance of valuable possessions, the state of being rich, material prosperity, plentiful supplies of a particular resource. And I would actually have that conversation from some real global lenses. Like maybe I came a little bit too heavy talking about solar power. Would you be willing to talk about wind turbines then, motherfucker? And then the second one would still be the shipping. I would not see that point from that conversation. I would continue to say the Pan-African argument deals with shipping until you can overcome that argument. Then you're African or pro-Black. You're not exporting that much yet. And if you are, then if you're not exporting that much yet to where you have an entire boat of pro-Black products that you're exporting, then you would have to cede that point in a debate on pro-Black versus Pan-African to Pan-African, where there is shipping involved and the releasing of certain sanctions and tariffs on some of those products that are available to the global market. So I would talk about that from a lens of energizing the economy, connecting with those industries and developing that rich Black infrastructure to put products on that boat. And in so doing, creating that state of being rich for those Black business owners who are creating actual products such as merchandise available. My interest would be those who have things like B1 Network on a coffee mug or a tumbler, as they might call it, a cup. And the ability to fill up your section or your plat or your crate of commerce and interglobal trade with your merchandise, that cup that is then distributed among that network. So that material prosperity second bullet I think, is the accumulation of access to those markets where if you sent that pallet, or before you sent that pallet of cups, how much could you fit in there? Well, let's break that down. Material prosperity, meaning what does your inventory look like? And if your inventory is 100 cups times 100 rows, damn, I wish I was better at math. I think it's 4 zeros. 110 times is 1,000. So 100 times is one more zero. 10,000 cups. And how much is a cup? Well, let's say the mugs are going 4 for 20. Fuck it, you the homie, 5 for 20. So you got a shipper's rate, and you talking about putting in that little bubble wrap. You know how much bubble wrap it costs for 10,000 cups? The good ones. Now, if you downgrade the material to that plastic, then you don't got a heavy enough object. You're not really equipping something that they can fight back with. A fucking tumbler, fuck out of here, man. You need something with some sturdiness to it. I would almost say steel. It could be aluminum or hollow, but they're combustible or something like that. So maybe if it was thrown from a distance, it might cause something, or if it melts quicker at whatever degree, it might provide you more material prosperity per square inch. Especially if your segment or your contribution is only going to be one pallet. And I think I might have the conversation with people who say, sign me up for 100, rather than people who say, sign me up for an entire pallet. Now, if that's looking down on a nigga, then so be it. But I think people would be more willing to do the 100 or even the 500. You start talking like that, and what do they say about a nigga? So you just move forward to that third bullet. There are plentiful supplies of a particular resource that African Americans could provide through the diaspora. One of them being like hip hop. It was CDs. Before that, it was probably tapes. And then DVDs or something like that. Bootlegs, something, a burnt disc. Audio file. Intellectual property. There's plenty of intellectual property on the market that's for sale. Another question that I would ask would be based around inequality. The state of not being equal, especially in status, rights, and other opportunities. And behind this inequality, you'll find approximately 6 by 3, so 18 people who have collectively probably more money than all Black Americans. And are we the standard bearer for the diaspora? Well, let's look at our shipping and see if we've exported the intelligence or the intellectual property or the skill building upset that has allowed more growth economically globally. Okay, that's enough. Long sentence. Hope it rocks with and resonates with someone. I have the conversation again from a lens that I can see the Bill Gates and the Mark Zuckerbergs, but I can see that my conversation isn't for the Bill Gates or the Mark Zuckerbergs. My conversation is for Tim Scotts. My conversation is for, or should be directed to, the NAACP, the Congressional Black Caucus, and the Black Chamber of Commerce. And if that is where my conversation should be, then the type of information that's necessary for me to possess is information around those studies, like this information I put on the screen for you. Study of nearly 2 million American households with investment portfolios of $3 million or more found that more than 22%, 440,000 American households, had between a quarter, which is around $750,000, and half, 1.5 million of their holdings in cash. $1.5 million in cash. More than 22%. So more than 440,000, almost half a million. What is that? Yeah, half of a million households with 1.5 million in cash. That is outlandish to me. That is hella numbers. That's football numbers. I like that type of conversation. It was published by Chris Warren, a contributor to Forbes. And I would want to be able to say, now let's break that shit down. Because I'm not a groupie of the rich, and I do believe that creating millionaires is important. I would want to say, well, let's look at it from this lens. One, where you can examine them in three groups. The super green, or that 893,000 households with investment portfolios worth between $3 million and $5 million. The total value of that group being 2.7 million, 2.7, I give you, to $4.465 trillion. All I did was the math. I would want to say break it down. I don't know if this thing goes back, but if it goes back, I'm talking about that 500,000 households, and that 22%, which is about 500,000 households that have, hella cash. They're cash heavy than a motherfucker. I tell you, $750,000, that's a lot of motherfucking money. Now you got to be able to rock with Brother Moses as I'm bringing this information in order to see if I'm being facetious or if I'm just asking a question whether to understand if someone's pro-black or not. Am I challenging? Am I actually creating some pushback? Is this sarcasm, or is this nigga actually serious when he says, I would break that shit down? I would act very fascinated having that conversation and say, that super green group, that almost 1 million, about 893,000 households. All right. And they have that, somewhere between 2.7 and $5 trillion. And we're talking cash. I remember the first time I presented that information, I said, not billion, $1 trillion. And then I broke it down and told you about group 2 being that Coke White segment of that pie on your left that has been broken out to show you what 2 million households looks like and how that big number that they're talking about actually breaks down, and give you some dollar values for what it breaks down. And you can compare your bank account to what that is. And this is just cash in their investment portfolios in that smaller segment. But the broader picture is how much, when they tell you America's gross domestic product is $19 trillion, and I'm giving you these numbers where it's 4.465 trillion in one, 6.8 trillion in the other, 2.7 trillion in that one. And if you add those up, you get something more than around 12 of that $19 trillion in total gross domestic product. And then I show you where that cash is going in so few houses. Now, it may come off originally as me being envious or jealous of those small minority, that talented tenth or that 1%. And that's not what I'm saying at all. You would miss it. You would miss the premise. I would tell you I'm having the conversation on pro-black or Pan-African. And I would say, now, out of all of that wealth or all of that cash, not even the wealth portion, but investment, which is a whole different segment of American income or financial literacy, is investment. And how much of that investment in cash reserves is consolidated among so few of you. And so I would ask the question from a lens as if I don't already know how few African Americans made that list. And so I would compare how few African Americans had made that list, and I would give a positive reinforcing investment opportunity in Africa, one that allows them to finally invest black instead of investing whack. And I would preface that with a quote from one of my favorite African Americans, Du Bois, when he said, to be a poor man is hard, But to be a poor race in a land of dollars is the very bottom of hardship. He said that in The Souls of Black Folk, and that's on page 6 for those who have that in their library. But I'm just Brother Moses. Married man and a husband. Father and a veteran. Trying to make $1 out of 15 cents. It's hard to be legit and still pay your rent. And I guess this is at the point where I decided that it should include a music break, so I let it rock. Hey dog. And that was just 2 of my top 25 that black men should be angry about. That's just 2, man. I know that information is powerful. I don't gotta get a fire sign in the chat. I don't gotta get now 1 black fist in the chat that agrees. I know that information is fire right there. And that's critical. And I just drop it and let it rock, and then I'll leave, man. That's it. I give you what I think is important, man. If you see the slides, if you can rock with it, hopefully that information is right there on the level. Hopefully it's of a value add. Let me see the screen I share. That's right. Let's do this. I'm going to take off the black screen and show you this is just a composition of files that I've created in order to have more in-depth and more elaborate conversations. Conversations such as, how do we fund reparations? Because they may say, and young brother, what's your solution? And I would say thank you. Funding reparations, number 1, would require and mandate a Confiscation Act bill on the 2020 ballot. And the entire marijuana industry, legal with banking involved, as a legitimate intercontinental trade initiative, primarily driven by the African American man. Export business, I would say that's on the table for funding reparations. And it requires your support as Tim Scott, the senator. Is that in the top 3 bills proposed or endorsed by Tim Scott? I don't know, because for a while they had him trapped inside of committees like the small business and transportation committees. And I think the small business one still has some legs that he could stand on. The small business one would have some legs. So answer the question before you could even ask young brother Moses, what would be your solution? And I would say the funding reparations through those swift bills on the 2020 ballot are a critical trademark legacy defining moment bill that I would want pushed. Now, y'all know Brother Moses, when I'm talking bills, I could go on one. Like, I really wish this thing would show you this. But when I say major legislation would be my ask for the Tim Scott, and even access to that information once it's passed or once it's studied, access to that information from 1861 to 1867, that reparations claim and how it's broken down economically by our great economists inside the, it's been done. He knows it's been done, and he has access to the people who actually stockpiled that data repository. The layman like myself, I may try to double click on that link and it send me a computer virus or something. But as a senator and as to those special committees and the people manning those special committees, I think it's only in our benefit to ask him to provide that information. I'm thinking people like Money Mayweather, for example. When I'm thinking about those households that have $750,000 in savings, I think about it from the lens of a senator who is passing bills and hopefully using those bills to influence the executive office and get their buy-in and support as well, so that more initiatives like Save to Win can actually be funded. Save to Win being an American Savings Promotion Act signed by President Obama December 18th of 2014. I like the element in it that was prize-linked savings vehicles, where collective interest of savers is redistributed via a raffle. And so almost taxing lottery tickets again, but in reverse, because it's pegged to savings accounts and the ability to earn more as you pay. Why is that important? Because they will ask, what is the solution? And they will see that the interconnecting messages for Black men, even from the crime bill, which is a previous president, I know, and the previous president being linked to the election of President Obama, the other senator that I would even consider having that conversation with, besides Tim Scott or Cory Booker. Definitely can't have the conversation with those who are in the House, like John Conyers or Elijah Cummings, because both of them have died of mysterious circumstances, if you ask me, recently. And I would want to have that conversation from a lens of someone who knows what I'm talking about, which is privatized loans from the Federal Reserve and the type of contracts that are needed or agreements, and what those contracts should explicitly state, such as the arrangement of the real estate negotiations for their cultivation, the refining, the port concessions, the shipping, as all a part of that agreement. And that's why you would have to have the conversation that includes the context, such as the Sherman Act or Special Field Order 15, and that land, and the port right there being Charleston, which was the #1 slave port. That's ours now. There is no way that you should be able to say no to something like that when we're telling you the economic benefits are its controlled and strategic and targeted control of a certain sector of the transatlantic slave trade routes. And that data right now, that's ours. That 80% of the tax base that was generated even at the time was driven through those ports and through trade that was linked right there. And that today we have solutions, pallets and pallets of merchandise that we can be supplying in a global scale, and that we are. There are some who are doing it, but nothing as strategic and as tactical as that type of contract or agreement or lucrative diasporic trade agreement, one that requires a United States of Africa, if it's going to see itself through to fruition, and one that considers land, labor, and capital and one strategic pathway, which is, for me, like I said, you can look at it from a lens of corn. Feeding the world. Maybe they don't want to specialize in agriculture, or maybe the development and the training grounds in the schools, like we have the HBCUs that are A&M universities, maybe that is the stimuli of learning that supports the reinvestment and the redistribution and the Confiscation Act in order to drive such a historic and radical idea forward, like reparations. And the only way you can have that reparations conversation is one that looks at savings vehicles as a way of distributing that money, that profit, those Harriet Tubman $20 bills, backed by trade. What is the actual trade? Well, we have a group of African Americans who not only deliver content and intellectual property, such as the Ebony magazines, Jet magazines, and things like that, that fit and ship well on these platforms, and the redistributed copies of that information, those magazines and such. And we know that there's a network that exists for such marketing and materials already. And it can also come with the inclusion of certain products such as those car marshal and given access to American vehicles. And, we have a particular flavor for American vehicles, but let's just start small like niggas like to do. And let's just look at small scale products that don't scare people tremendously, like African Americans exporting Fords and Chevrolets to Africa, and whatever port they have there that is willing to receive a massive influx. Let's think smaller. What could Moses contribute to that Marcus Garvey type expenditure? It would probably be a pallet of cups. Now, Moses may not want to send plastic cups, but that's probably all that Moses can afford, unless you take the idea of what Moses can afford and then allow that to become a bond, a trust bond on the business of Brother Moses, and the access to capital to upgrade that now, what would have been out of my own cash to buy the inventory, equity, and turn that equity on the other side of the equation into, goods? And then the cost of goods sold then comes back as that pallet is upon arrival. Now, I think the small business role, Mr. Senator, sir, as a part of that committee was fire, because of the access it created to the Federal Deposit Insurance Company's Committee on Economic Inclusion. And having visited their website, I know that that committee focuses on small business. See, you were connected. As well as mortgage credit, which is the number one asset that niggas have. Consumer credit, which is the number one debt or liability that they have compared to investment portfolios. Insured deposits, which in my case would be the $250,000 of cash. Now, the people I'm talking to already have $750,000 in cash, all the way up to $1.5 million in cash. And then we broke that down for you. That was why that data is important to know. And then lastly, on that bullet where I think we have the biggest opportunity area is financial education. Key programs like Money Smart Financial Education Program and the Youth Banking Network. Earmark Youth Banking Network to what I would consider the Hope in a Box Fund, or John Bryant Hope, and the Clinton Global Initiative, or the Clinton Foundation. All right. See, Brother Moses would want to talk about land and capital. Many of us can do it from the lens of labor. When you have the conversation about 40 acres and a mule, even if a brother was to consider 40 acres and a mule, the first thing their mind might jump to is agriculture. And thus being on agriculture, they can see it being labor intensive, and they don't see themselves as hiring slaves or automation and mechanization. They consider them, or they can only see themselves from the lens of being that slave out there planting each of these plants individually in a row, 100 seeds being planted, 100 seeds being developed and cultivated over time. And for some, they would have that conversation from the lens of corn. Others would want to include, the refining of whatever products or businesses that were coming from that 40 acres and a mule, or that Sherman Act, that reservation, that promised land, if you ask me. Brother Moses, lead the people to the promised land, but the port sessions that are attached to it, as well as the shipping and how that connects across platforms, again, being a Pan-African argument that also supports a pro-Black perspective. And that's something that would have to be written in as a part of our agreement. And the reason why I would have to have that conversation with people such as the gentleman from South Carolina. And I give myself kudos because there are other men who could have the conversation on the lens of gender war. And they can give you information about Black women being divorced, or the rate of divorce for Black women. And they can also give you the information about Black women who put Black men on child support. And those are their talking points. And they consider vital statistics. And they can look at the chart, the end product of a vital statistic, but you can't give them the actual data and show them much, because they wouldn't know how to read the chart that I put on the screen. It wouldn't make any sense to them. And so from all of that and the data, they could give you that gender war conversation and essentially try to drive that home by saying the single parent household mother, and single mom this and single mom that, single mom this and single mom that. As if they couldn't take that same energy and talk about the Vicky Palmers in that African American group. Retired executive vice president, financial services and administration for Coca-Cola Enterprises, Inc., who could deliver a specialty in multi-currency asset management and sat or sits on the board of trustee for Spelman College. No, they couldn't have the conversation from that same energy and talk about the Deborah Sandlers. They jumped straight to their favorite one, their favorite Black woman to target is the Oprah Winfrey and the single mothers who watch Oprah Winfrey coming up. And Brother Moses would attempt to redirect that conversation back to land, labor, and capital, and provide examples of land, labor, and capital, and say, look, bro, those conversations are for a different person, maybe. But those conversations aren't moving the conversation forward. The conversation forward being, okay, now you're talking about single mother households, and you say that it has a devastating economic impact on the children that they raise, that many of those children are raised in what you would consider conditions conducive of creating at-risk youth. And I would say, I got that. It's creating homes that are underbanked and homes that are unbanked, where people live in a home with their family or with their next of kin, and they only have a savings account at best, or they don't even have a savings account. Like 35% of them don't even have a savings account. Underbanked households. I would say you're talking about single moms, and you're pointing out from that gender war conversation, the Black women, single moms, and their divorce rate. and its devastating impact economically, creating at-risk youth. I get that. See, I would repeat their point again. I would say, and it's being dismissive, or it's writing out of the whole conversation the reality of those households that make less than $15,000, that at-risk youth, that byproduct of that single mom who lives in a home with either their family or like kin, friends, and they only have like a savings account, bro. And those that make between 15 to 30,000. And how that graph starts to peel itself back further and further when you start looking at, well, how many of those households are black that are making between $30,000 and $50,000? And oh yes, there are others that we could name if I really had to be forced to have the conversation with them about black media or things like that. I try to avoid having a conversation with them in general. As a general rule, they like to deflect too much from me. When we say, I know, I get that, but I think you're missing the Lyndon Johnson Rice argument or legacy and her tenure. You're talking about the wrong woman for issues such as reparations and such. These are the women that you might want to have that conversation with. The Carla Harrises, the Bridget Hellers, the Kathy Hughes. Or you can have the conversation about colorism. For me, I'd say you'd want to have a conversation on reparations about privatized federal loans, which can be used to cover all debts, including legal, health, property, business, addiction, treatment, recovery, student loans, child support, things like that. And if you're going to be creating a universal fund anyway, it might as well have some things written inside the agreement. Bank of Africa. Imagine that. Gwendolyn Sykes, Denise Napier, Carol Williams, President, FEO, and Chief Creative Officer of Carol H. Williams Advertising. Oh, so I think I know what my imagination did. So when I took these names of these black women in excellence, these African-American women, I was looking at it and somebody had said, well, what about, an African-American NASA or something like that? And it triggered something in me that wanted to say, well, what about Chief Financial Officer of NASA, Gwendolyn Sykes? Oops. The Chief Financial Officer of NASA, Gwendolyn Sykes, who I would have given a role as, in that whole conversation as a woman with the skill set to keep the Department of Treasury honest and to protect the integrity of reparations funded for ADOS. And that way ensuring that the descendants aren't the ones who are now giving the federal debt, but that the descendants are the ones to actually receive those Harriet Tubman $20 bills. $20 trillion worth of Harriet Tubman $20 bills printed and pressed and distributed in America through some form of banking model to the descendants of slavery. Yeah, I would say that's a pretty reasonable conversation to have, and to be able to point out how that is executed and by whom, and to give examples of Black excellence as to where your by whom need not look any further than the African American already. And from this perspective, I just give some women. And then, sorry, my bad. It was important to mention that because that conversation about NASA triggered a thought. And from that thought, we have action, and let it be manifest and let it resonate. And as it is said, so let it be. Because she has a partner in crime there that can support her, who the treasurer of the state of Connecticut. And this is another sister. And if given a role similar or akin in that project, it would be something like ensuring the ADOS public funds achieve solid returns as a best performing investment instrument. Ensuring the ADOS public funds achieve solid returns as a best performing investment instrument. That's my indica barking in the background. Don't mind her. But because she barked, I'll say it one more again. Ensuring the ADOS public funds achieve solid returns as a best performing investment instrument. See, you need not worry or have concern on can niggas actually do something, niggas gonna fuck it up, or niggas can never get shit right. We have treasurers of state that are ADOS. We have chief financial officers for NASA. And there are other uses of information that are particular to NASA that she may not be able to disclose, such as their financial statements. But that doesn't mean that she couldn't manage that insight or that oversight of the financial treasury, particularly when you have other, that's your homegirl, your ace boom coon, the ABCs. It should look easy, but it's not. It was just pre-prepared. And while they could engage in a gender conversation or a gender war dialogue, it would be dismissive of those with $1.5 million in cash, as well as dismissive of those who are underbanked, not just of the Black excellence and the women that are available for critique, such as Carol H. Williams, President FEO and Chief Creative Officer of Carol H. Williams Advertising, because one of the main things you would want to know is how is that marketed? You can get the bill passed, but how do you know where to sign up? I'll give you a clue. Jim, become a Patreon. Yeah, this soundbite or this snip is not something that would be debated or discussed, probably because they would dismiss it and just say, well, you're giving one-off scenarios of African-American women. Nah, they don't do it like that. They just hit you with the colorism argument and say, well, mulattoes like Lyndon Johnson Rice and her Black media mismanagement are bad signs of management of reparations funding. What is this? And so if they're not on that end of the spectrum, that's why I put 3 images up here. Because there are products that should be on those boats. So look at Miss Kim Nelson, for example, Senior VP President, Snacks Unlimited, General Mills. That's global. And I would say, they have space on the palette too. General Mills, and having contracts like, let's say an African American wants to sell General Mills cereal to that network of stores that want to sell more General Mills. And you want to distribute that. So you got 100 boxes. And, well, I don't know. You got your same palette. Mine was cups. So I used the rule of 10,000. So you have 10,000 boxes of cereal. How much does that cost? Well, for you probably had to buy them for like $2.93 a box. And so you had to determine for yourself, did you want to sell the box or the bag? See, Moses was like, I don't know if you either want to sell the box or the bag, but when it comes to quantifying information, well, that's probably a conversation you should have with members of the B1 network. Because we're not going to waste your time on the deflection. We'll tell you that it's a deflection, but we'll also give you vital information that could support your argument in either way. Humble rather than the iron fist. I'm going to beat your information down when it comes to a pro-Black or Pan-African debate. And I'm going to tell you why the Pan-African probably has longer legs than a pro-Black one. See, while others might want to wait for that pro-Black to finally come together and create a website and get these products together, that Pan-African market is a lot bigger and a lot richer when it comes to a shipping business. So even when you get to that level of unity you talking about, and I know there's those who say, well, Brother Moses, why didn't you put exceptional Black men on this list? Because you could have found them. I would say you do the homework if you want to do that. I was having the conversation to debunk this gender war narrative as being a vital way of spinning this conversation. I think that it's just an ad hominem attack at best on the Black woman, and again at Black excellence, from those who like to throw ad hominem attacks at Black excellence in general. And it doesn't matter if they were talking about the Black woman, mulattoes, or the welfare mom. That single Black mom and the at-risk youth that she creates. Interesting that the funding reparations conversation comes up, but that's the information that was able to be delivered today. Hopefully it resonates with someone and they find it first in good spirit and in good energy. But from there, the one I actually wanted to present is having some technical difficulties. That is middle class economics. And there is one that had a video already created, which is a bite-sized snippet that's available. I like it a little bit more because it's quick and to the point. But it's available nonetheless. The issue is the technology is not allowing me to deliver it in a fashion that gets it all out there. What up, nephew? You need something? Damn, that was a hell of a road trip. But if I'm forced to entertain the conversation from the lens of these at-risk youth who are actually created, which is where I would want the conversation to naturally progress towards, I would provide as contextual information this same report delivered on George Macon's channel, which demonstrates the creation of ghettos and links it to that conversation on redlining, of course, as the creation of ghettos. That color schematic that you see, the red, the yellow, the blue, and the green, still available for assessment today. What really drive them crazy is because I would also link this video. Bull Mastiff, if you're wondering. Yeah, what's happening? Wow, they give you the capability and then deny you access to it. I did exactly what they told me I should do in order to embed videos into a presentation and it's not working. That's interesting. Well, if I could refresh it. No, they don't even got the refresh button. Damn. You know why it really sucks is because when I watch this Whitney Plantation Museum video, it takes me to the different plantations in the South, and the claim for any of those plantations that still are in that area is a huge claim, brother. It's a huge claim. And even though they're so-called protected under, federal right, that is what you're essentially asking for, is the distribution of even those museums back into the hands. And from that, the information of the digital catalog that you're able to provide in the form of education and curriculum to the diaspora is huge. And they want to use the black man as an example, as someone who should be leading in this area. And while the conversation can naturally gravitate towards, commodities such as the cups and things that one might also sell, the intellectual property is going to be the biggest. And the intellectual property right that is therein, the videography of these plantations and that land, and then the construction of that, and moving forward that reparations debate. What happens when black folks own it and black folks operate these museums and such and provide that information? I say you get a boost in global economies because they can relearn again what the slaves were doing in order to increase agriculture as a globally traded product. And it's not just agriculture, because that agriculture is everything from the trees and the pots to the garden tools. And all of those are commodities that get shipped and put on boats. And while some might say cups, and I might not want the plastic ones, I might want something a little bit heavier with some pop to it. That's where the conversation goes. It goes from this Whitney plantation to all of the different plantations that are in that area, and the legitimate claim to right to ownership of those plantation museums, and to say, you know what, they're under the authority or the governance of the federal government right now, but we're going to sign those over. And that is a decision that has to be proposed by somebody like a Tim Scott. And it has to be in a bill, and it has to list all of those plantations. And yes, there would be some pushback, but we as the B1 network and as black folks and as African Americans or as ADOS have to at least have it heard, that recommendation or that proposal, that bill, that resolution. See, I do talk land. And you back it up with the data on redlining and all of that thing, where you look at the Homeowners Loan Corporation, established in 1933, and where they refinanced 1 million mortgages, non-farm residences. Again, hold on to that. The refinancing was not the non-farm residencies. Was non-farm residences. And that was to the tune of about $3 billion. It was a long-term fixed mortgage, fully amortized, paid without a second loan. It was risk default concerns that prompted a risk assessment on 40,000 plus population cities. That was one of the causes of, or one of the reasons why they felt it was important to propagate such information. And they looked into the ownership of the homes and the loans that backed them or insured them, and they based it on race. It was race-based legislation that is still to this day. And they used a standardized appraisal process of all of that land. That's important today if you're having a pro-black conversation, is to be able to appraise the land values. That's information that you need. That is vital information. All you can say is, yes, include that in the bill, is a standardized appraisal of all land. That's in there. That's butter. I don't know why and I think that's probably why they don't push back against it. But from an intellectual viewpoint, then if they're pushing back against reparations, then they're also pushing back against that HR 40 bill. And if they're pushing back against the bill in general, then there's no way that we could even win, whether pro-black or Pan-African. And so that debate point, I would say, is more detrimental to not just the discussion, but to both sides of that coin. Now, when we're talking about redlining, we give them the stats and we tell them that it was broken down. When you look at those colors were used to determine, and this is their categorization process: best, desirable, declining, and then hazardous. Now, we might not agree, but we can agree that that model would work. Yeah, I would take it. Yeah, give me that. Give me the blueprint towards property appraisal based on those four categories. What is the best property one might be able to acquire? So, and then you can define best. What does best mean? And many folks would say, well, I'm talking economically when I want to define best. So I'm talking about what is the land value? What is the property value? Then others would say design, and then declining. Show me all properties. You know, they would want a pivot table, all properties with a declining property value, and highlight those for me. And let me work with that data set. And I want to take that data set and I want to match it to the states, and then to the cities, and then to the town. And so show me all of that. I want to pivot all the way down to, and then I want to be able to see the declining property values in, you know, and that's that information that you then say, now that that information is readily available and accessible, I want that digital access on my website, that anybody who clicks on my link now has access to it. And most likely it would be people who come to my page anyway, which is African Americans. And in that same sense, if they rock with Brother Mo, it's probably African American real estate people. They want that list. And they might filter towards declining, or they might filter towards the best, but it would still prove that same claim on that information. But the only way to get that information then is, what my pushback would be, is you have to be for the HR 40, and you have to be for the bill and for the conversation in general. Being against it or saying it's, you know, it's not worth it or it'll never happen, all of that shit is neither here nor there. And so having a conversation with them, I wanted to be able to pull it up and show the history of redlining, which is that image that you see there, the actual contracts that were used by those banks. And then I also found that information to be pertinent to where I was raised, right there in Del Paso Heights, or Sacramento, California. So when I say you want that information to be readily available, I can do the research and I can show you that I've done the research. But the only thing I can tell you is that it is a time-consuming process for an individual to have to do it. And there has to be a more streamlined user experience. And that user experience is that request for that data skill set first and foremost, or that data first and foremost. Just like when the Sister Candace Owens went to that House committee meeting and said, where is the data on white supremacy? That breaks down to the state and to the town and municipality, and it breaks into that data on convictions, and those are from the judges, which is why I have the conversation and say Judge Mathis or Judge Joe Brown, but it also goes to the policing, which is why I say look at it from a bigger lens. And they say property value, you're talking at-risk youth. At risk of what? They're talking about criminality as their talking points. And then they say Chicago as their talking points. And they have the conversation about blackness from that perspective of throwing black in the garbage, throwing African American and doing business with African Americans in the garbage. And the point is, they're moving in a space that is more individualistic capital mind state, guerrilla marketing and do-it-yourselfers and that type of shit, self-made. They're not talking from a global perspective, and I think that defeats their own purpose. I think when you're talking the highest rate of return, you would have to open up that book of business. Pan-African shipping. I mean, like, you can get shipping and handling here for like $7. And it's now back on Black accountability to have merchandise for sale and to develop their own network of people willing to purchase their merchandise. And understanding, a memorandum of understanding between not just content creators. Sorry, Indica just ran in the house. That's not going away. That was funny. My damn nephew let the dog in and she ran full speed upstairs as fast as she could. And I would want to be equipped to have that conversation with people who claim to represent Black media, such as the Black Business School and its founders who focus on things such as stocks and in other investment instruments. I would want that conversation to not move too far away from understanding that we're targeting that 60% of underbanked that only had a credit card, which is the reverse of what we would like to see and the opposite of what we would consider a successful conversion of reparations funding. While some would say cut the check, others would see access to more credit as a victory. And I'm not on that spectrum. I'm on the one that says, look at the opportunity as it is. This is where the opportunity is greatest to have its greatest impact. These are the households. These are the ADOS that you're referring to. This is us. Give them the information out loud. Savings can help households better manage unexpected expenses or emergencies, such as a sudden illness, job loss, or home or car repairs. The absence of savings can sometimes be a barrier to financial security. We know that. And we also know that that information presented from the educated lane can sometimes get drowned out as they try to present it in larger platforms or spaces where they might have access. African American Progress Report 2020. Being able to find those demographics that have between 8.6 trillion and 13.765, not billion, but trillion dollars in cash. No. She's getting big and she's looking good. That's my indica. Of the Americans who have savings accounts, the median balance of transactional accounts is $4,500. The average balance is $40,200. Where do you sit on that spectrum? Are you below that? Are you at the median? Or are you at that average balance? You don't have to answer, but that is a pro-Black conversation. And that is a question to determine your pro-Blackness. And that is also one that should be up to debate. And if you ask me what are the top 25 things that African Americans should be angry with, this makes the list once you have that answer. This is according to the Federal Reserve Survey of Consumer Finances, which is conducted every 3 years, most recently in 2016, which should have been in 2019. The Fed defines transactional accounts as checking, savings, money market, and call accounts, as well as prepaid debit cards. Retirement and brokerage accounts, for instance, would not qualify as transactional accounts. So for those educated lames who say I have a 401k that I'm maxing out that I can borrow against, that is an advantage. And I wouldn't say that that's a bad thing, but I would say that this conversation could benefit not just you. So don't just look from a lens of how this conversation benefits you. I would say it's important to look at it from a lens of what's in it for you. And hopefully you're getting that information out of this conversation, that this is triggering that type of thought. If that so be you, as it is said, so it is. For others, are you at the position of living off of the interest? Most of us would say no, especially when we look at those investment vehicles that were just named, the money market account. It's only a 0.012% return, or a 1.2% return if you look at it like that. The high yield savings being a 2.15 and a certificate of deposit being about a 3. And then being able to take that information and look at it and say, well, they had the median of cash was 40,000 according to the Treasury. So that's not that top 10%, but everybody, or that, yeah, the top 1%ers, that's to everybody else. And if you don't got, 15 to 30 or the 30 to 50 and those demographics that I broke down a little bit earlier, where do you sit? And to be able to take that assessment as a Black man and take that information and see if this is vital for you. Because what it's saying then, by saying the median and knowing where you sit, if that median is 40, is that a goal for you, or are you past that? And then look at the money market rate. If that's where your money is sitting in a money market rate, that's not a high return. If you had all of that $50,000 cash sitting in a money market rate, then your annual return is $600. The monthly return is only $50. What does that actually afford you? Well, for most people, a $50 monthly return is probably the creation of content and intellectual property. But it's not good coverage for cups. If you could only spend $50 on stockpiling your inventory, or $50 on the total inventory that you have to sell on the market, how many cups would that buy you? And that's assuming that you're actually spending the return instead of allowing it, let it ride. So you leave the 50 in that money market and it earns you $50 that you're now able to invest in your business or whatever it is. What kind of business would it be? For many folks, that's barely scratching the, well, I needed a premium distribution channel that linked with my Facebook or my Instagram. And so my channel was the iPhone deal, and my iPhone cost me more than $50 a month. I digress. You say, I'm gonna put that 50,000 in there. How many years would it take for that 50,000 to turn into 300,000, like the next example on the next column, which is the high yield savings account that returns a higher return? And if your goal is to have $300,000 in a high yield savings account, I think that's an admirable goal. Which is also why I would beg to ask the question, where do you fall on that spectrum? Even then, the monthly return on $300,000, let's say you were spending it month to month, you gave yourself an income. Your annual return would be about $6,000. Now, I don't know who can live off of $6,000. But your monthly return, or your monthly allowance would be $537.50. I definitely like the certificate of deposit route, $400,000, if that's who you are. The annual return of around $12,000 and a monthly return of $1,000 a month. Now, while you may not be able to survive off of $1,000 a month, I know a lot of families that can. And that's, again, who we're talking about here. Creating a trust with returns of $1,000 a month and how that's administered. $750,000 in a trust in my name that would cover all three of these. The 400,000 certificate of deposit with that 3% return, what that $400,000 gives me is an annual return of $12,000 and a monthly return of $1,000. The high yield savings account of $300,000 with a 2.15% return adds an additional $537 a month, as well as that money market rate, which is the one that I would probably be most flexible with. Because as you see again, most African American, not just men, but most African Americans are probably at an income of about $50,000 a year. That being said, you would want to have $50,000 a year as a minimum, which is the equivalent of a deposit into your account of $50,000. Now, the most common use, as they're telling you with our information, is a money market account. And that's even if they do have a savings account. Many of them just have a checkings. And so when we say cut the check, that electronic deposit of $50,000 per year is good. But again, it's really only a monthly return of $50. Even to start off with that bare minimum of a welfare mom, which is the equivalent of around $1,587.50 per month. Super poor. You would need to have it backed by a bill of trust, one that is in banking, certified documents, with your social security number, name on it. Or in our case, I would include the tax ID because I know I'm talking about the business model. I talk about this from an economic lens. Now, I've done this and I'm going to do it again. Others like to have this social economic redlining conversation or talking point, and they like to deflect to it from the ghettos and the gender war and the black mom and the welfare case and her creating at-risk youth, at risk for what? Criminality. And they give the example of Chicago crime rates. And what I say is that when they use that talking point, they do so to validate white supremacist talking points. And a better argument is one that can address the white supremacist talking points that have negative stereotypes attached to black people who are poor and who attack black people in general as a means towards justifying the inheritance that they've been passed down of something like $750,000 certificates with their name on it. Now, again, I gave you the information that showed the households that had that in cash. But it was just a point of reference for the bigger debate. And it was necessary to have that information to be able to quote it and say, well, it was like 500,000 households or 500,000 households that have that in just cash. It's not an unfeasible recommendation to say 1.5 million in cash and show you the image of Floyd Mayweather and the $100 bills that he has stacked up and say that's not a far-fetched ideology to have or solution. Cut the check. I want mines in cash, and I would prefer it in a Harriet Tubman $20 bill, especially if you have in mind cutting $22 trillion of those. I would say distribute those through reparations to a nigga like me and include me in that. And at the same time, back that up with the actual bill, certificates of deposits, high yield savings, and that money market rate that allows me to get my check. And no, I don't think that check is something that should be a one-time deposit of. And I can show you where salaries are already of this $50,000 a year. So miss me. That's median. That is bottom of the bottom. And it's not too much to ask for. even affording that privilege, that boost, that living off of the interest. But no, they say they made smart investment decisions. Like, oh, when technology was first coming out, when Microsoft was first coming out, I invested in because I believed in Bill Gates. When Facebook was coming out, and if Negroes would invest in Apple stocks instead of Michael Jordans in the 1990s, where would they be today? They say they set auto payments to avoid late fees as a way of saying niggas are untrustworthy creditors because they be missing payments. They be sending in their payments late, and they might not send in a payment, and it might have to go to collections. That's what they say about black men. They say they eliminated needless bills like cable TV. Like, hey, you want to save some money? Why don't you disconnect from Comcast? And that dude Robert Allen starts screaming, no, don't say that. Don't talk about the Roku and the Fire Sticks. Don't sell a crate of Fire Sticks. Don't change out the ports on those Fire Sticks to be able to fit inside a smartphone. Oops. Did I just say that out loud? Don't change the ports on those Fire Sticks to be able to connect to a smartphone. Oops. Did I just say that out loud? They say they cut debt, including mortgages and car notes. I'm saying, yeah, write that into the agreement. See, they say they saved the change, including dollar bills, as a way of saying niggas ain't got no money. They say they were frugal, they were thrifty, they coupon, and they buy things in bulk. I say niggas can learn from that, as well as being able to sell in bulk, because I have the conversation from a 40,000 foot view that sees the shipping lanes. And I see why they didn't want to approve that, why they wanted to renege on that Sherman Act. If they say they budget meticulously and they have different standards like the 50-30-20 rule, I look up and do research on the 50-30-20 rule, see what that is. And they say they protect their credit score while I tell you about what redlinings actually did to establish what credit score actually even means in America in the first place. And what they say about the Negro is that they lack financial discipline, that they're frivolous spendthrifts with insatiable thirst for immediate gratification. They say they're financially illiterate. They say we are. They say that's us, which is why they have those small programs sponsored by the FDIC. But then that's also why we have people like Tim Scott who shouldn't give up their seat for small business representation. On that committee. Those major statistics again that they love, 1 in 3 Americans, or 30%, have less than $5,000 saved for retirement, according to Northwestern Mutual's data. Nearly 7 in 10 Americans have less than $1,000 in savings. So I know I'm probably not talking to people who have $40,000 in cash. I know I'm probably not talking to people who have $750,000 in cash, that when they compare themselves on that spectrum, they could probably benefit from reparations, and therefore they shouldn't be arguing against it in any public venue. I don't know why they would feel like that privately. Or maybe I give them the benefit of the doubt and say they don't actually feel like that privately, but they know that it's more popular to argue against it or to be a naysayer, to be somebody that says that can't happen. But me, I feel like we don't got time for that. And I don't really have time to entertain that way of thinking. I say it's time to start thinking in the terms of the Berkshire A's, where you look at one stock being $319,000. Feel me? That could lose the value of $754 in one day of trading. The Berkshire Hathaways, or the Warren Buffetts, or I would say the Terrence Crawford's best friend, or his Jewish white homie. And I would say, what would the impact be to finally have the conversation from a position of economic power for you to say, I have a share in Berkshire A stock. It's worth $319,000. Or for you to be able to just look at the investment portfolio, see if we know they don't have it in savings and we know that they're underbanked, then it would be logically to assume that they don't have these Facebook stock or these Facebook stock that were $201 at the time of this publication. Not the one live stream that I'm doing today, but when I created the content, that they may not have the Google that's just $1,000. Feel me? Or the JP Morgan, $114. And so for me to go in and say, did you hear about that black woman, that chief financial officer? Nigga, you better take that information and call it a blessing. When he says that anyway, I was going to go into the Apple stock and all that, but I'm going to keep driving because I understand we're dealing with sick individuals who have to have the conversation about a gender war rather than have the conversation with people we believe understand that Berkshire Hathaway's Berkshire A stock at $319,000, just the ability to say I have a Berkshire Hathaway stock that is worth $319,000, that's money I can't even touch as investment, is a hell of a statement to be able to make. Thank you, baby. But to be able to have that conversation with somebody who looks at the income statement that you have access to now, that you're able to access all the information on people similar or companies similar with the Berkshire A Hathaway stock, that you actually get to see the revenues and sales and shit like that, key data. The earnings and the dividends might be what people find the most important. And so to be able to provide that information that looks at the quarterly earnings whenever they announce it, and to see what the earnings per share was for that quarter. Now, for some, $3,873 a quarter might seem like nothing, but for others, that's damn near a whole welfare check. That is damn near a whole single mom paycheck right there of $15,000 a year. Only if the single mom was actually making $15,000 a year. Now, if you take the equivalency of these low income, low skilled jobs and say that's a part of reparations for black position, then I'll cut your motherfucking head off in the debate. That's where you'll hear me start turning up. Essentially, the ability to not be able to have the conversation from a position of power is one that says, well, you're not thinking institutionally. And so you're not thinking the management of real estate funds is an important conversation to have from the lens of the leading real estate fund. Motherfucker, Berkshire Hathaway, $319,000. Nigga, you talking about whole homes. What do they invest in? Real estate, motherfucker. I talk about this reparation shit from the lens of land and contractual agreements. I talk about it from banking and trust, which shows you revenue estimates of $66 billion in a trust. That the earnings per share estimate was like $3,873. That if you break that by a quarter, you know that there's 3 months. So you're talking about $1,125 a month. And what does that mean? Well, ask an entrepreneur what it means to earn $1,250 per month through whatever product you sell, and they'll say that's good business right there. They ain't gonna turn that down. Had these conversations with Republican black conservatives, and they seem to dismiss that conversation outright and in general because they want to talk about crime statistics in Chicago. And they use so as a way of saying black men are incapable of managing income and income streams and their cash flow. And that's the reason why black folks aren't in a position of economic power, is because they are squandering the income that is even in their pocket. They can't talk about real estate. They can't talk about investments. They can't talk about planes, trains, and automobiles. So me talking about shipping makes this whole Pan-African conversation mute unless I'm talking to somebody different than them. They don't see the benefit of shipping. They don't even see the one pallet argument, and they don't see the ability of merchandise as a small business and to be able to supply that into that market or whatever that market is that's generated through Black First, pro-Black, or Pan-African shipping. What do you put on the boat? Well, I put my cup on that motherfucker. I put my stamp of approval on there. And they can have the conversation that says, well, you can ship right here in America. And I would say yes. And point, now that you've brought that out, shipping in America, if you can be successful here in America with your business, then I would say your excellence and your business management and stewardship skills are probably the type of skill set we need when we're having the conversation in the first place. Let's have the conversation from the lens of how does it benefit the independent or the sole proprietor, the minority business owner, or the small businessman who's trying to come up and who's looking at distributing a product. And I would say that you would say yes to any reparations debate on that lens, one that would openly say, look, the gender war, we're not including that as a part of our debate. When you say pro-Black or Pan-African and look at the benefits and the economic impact, you want to have that conversation from the lens of multinational corporation status. Multinational enterprise. The creation of a pro-Black multinational enterprise. I want to drive this shit home because I be long-winded as fuck. So let me see if they'll let me bring this shit up just to show it one time. If they could show it, that should be fire. If they're not able to show it, then I'm gonna have to drive it home another way. I'm gonna do it this way. Let's see if they let me show it. B1 members only. I'm gonna open that up. And so when I say targeted and select and join the Patreon and join the B1 network movement, or at least have the conversation, I would put that debate with anyone in who you see on the screen right now. And I'm going to give them the name just like I would mention the ancestors if I was having a conversation about reparations. And while I don't say that all of these people ascribe to B1 or are B1 subscribers, I would say that there is a part of their ideology that you can benefit and learn from, one that also supports the claim that I'm making here today. And my claim is a claim of reparations, not just saying that it's owed, but showing you a funding mechanism, showing you bills, and showing you a blueprint for economic success through policy, and claiming the bills and claiming the HR 40 and providing it from a lens or from an argument that says I was having a superficial or whatever it is conversation with a Tim Scott, the senator. There ain't many black senators. And so I would tag them in the post and say this conversation would be for them, talking the power. And I would say this conversation is one that is going to cover pro-Black or Pan-African and see where you stand on that issue. And I would tell you that I can have that lens of one that complements either side of that argument. But if you ask me my specific personality type or the management style that I would say, who should you invest in? I would say pro-Black. And I would say allow that pro-Black movement to generate that surplus economic growth that you would look for with any business investment opportunity. So let me get to the naming of the people on the screen, and I'm going to give them a shout out because I'm Brother Moses. And that's what I do. I show love. And in that same debate, I would say that showing love is probably a more beneficial tool than spreading incendiary devices. So even though I would say I would want something with a little bit more pop, if I had something on that palette, it wouldn't be AK-47s. It would probably be solar panel conversion devices or energy conversion devices, connectors, and those that work in conjunction with little gadgets and gadgets that connect a Roku or a Fire Stick to a smartphone, and then the information that's stored as files would be links and access to the intellectual property rights, i.e., these YouTube content creators that I'm going to name right now. All of that information and the real time interconnectivity in that network, that media stream and its accessibility would be access to a channel such as the B1 network and all the connecting vertical pieces of the distribution of a network, which is you need a device to watch it on, which they already have smartphones if you look at that. And the major players who I would have the conversation if you follow Brother Moses are in telecommunications. And so you would need something that links with what they already have. And the content that we have for sale is one that does demonstrate blackness. And that's why the broader context, the Ebony and the Jet magazine, digital copies, and the Black Enterprise magazine, and that content is a good advertiser for that type of initiative, and being able to have access to their portfolio of data or assets, their property. Hopefully it's not all sold to Disney at this point. But we do know that there is individual content creators such as African Diaspora News Channel that is even in real time content that would allow that smart connectivity or that intergenerational wealth creating device and mechanism that Black media is, that product, to be distributed. And its distribution, I still say, is in the components. Don't miss out on those. Don't say, well, they have access to YouTube now. What stops them from logging on and subscribing? Look at the economic impact of the connecting pieces, the rubber that is necessary to create these copper, which is another mining industry, and its devices, the old Radio Shack position. Look at Black media from its global lens, and you can see the Pan-African perspective and why it's more profitable. But I tell you, I'm pro-Black because I'm Black first, and I believe that the representation has to be through actual tangible leadership. And so on this screen, I would say second on that line, and these are in alphabetical order, but is African Tigress, because you would want the interconnecting pieces in Africa to move and to market these products that are on that boat, products that connect to their smartphones. And you would want to be able to quantify it in forms of hundreds. And so what could you sell in units of 100 if not your intellectual property? And the only way that Black folks can afford to do that on a budget of like $50 is probably going to be in 100 episode increments, because even the editing costs that are associated with making that a viable, sustainable business model, the editing costs alone is 5G data consumption that would supersede your $50 a month allowance. If you had only $50, you'd be willing to invest $500 in order to generate $50, but by the hundreds. The third icon is Anthony Brian Logan, who I also subscribe to because I like the omni-channel marketing approach that attracts millennials. I'll say it again. I also subscribe to ABL because I endorse Black men who have successfully, in my eyes, leveraged omni-channel social media marketing to their advantage. I don't like the content, and I probably wouldn't watch many of his 100 episodes if it was packaged on a Roku stick, or if I could just scroll down and subscribe or if I could scroll down and consume it, I wouldn't find 100 episodes of what ABL creates entertaining. But that wouldn't stop me from including him on this page. Just like it wouldn't stop me from including that fourth icon, which is the B1 map from the Bahamas looking north. I wish it would let me open it because I think that's key. Let me see if they allow me to make it bigger. From this view, you see the Bahamas and the Caribbean and such. I backed out even more, but I thought this view was important because if you look across the ocean from the Bahamas, you will see the exact land of the Sherman Act, 40 acres and a mule. This shit is connected. Now, you can follow the drinking gourd and have that slave narrative conversation, or you could talk about the economics of this conversation and trade and shipping. And you can talk about it from a Pan-African lens that says now that these slaves were imported for whatever they cost, how do we get back to the conversations of import and export and what products you would like to see travel across those lands and seas? And if you can do so digitally, then I think you have a hell of a business model. Now, how do you do so digitally successfully if you can't plug and play into the existing systems that are in those communities and in that market? Again, Brother Moses has that same conversation from the lens of the brother who's in the Supreme Court case now getting it heard. That's Byron Allen. If you don't have access to these high population black markets and your advertising isn't something like the iconic images of the Jet Beauty of the Week, and you have 100 episodes to create, I would definitely want access, and as a part of my content, the Jet Beauty of the Week. And that would definitely be in there. Just like I would want access to the High Times magazine in order to propagate information about some of the best marijuana plants that can be grown there. Why? Because selling the seeds or the small plants are easier to ship. If I can sell a pack of seeds, that ships in the container or the crates of the 100, and there are 100 seeds inside of this pack. 100 is an easier number to manage. 100 by 100, even in square footage of growth in agriculture or backyard, man, maybe I'm too deep. They would have you to believe the relationship to be one-sided when it comes to Africa. But I would tell you that the Pan-African or United States of Africa is a good conversation, a good debate to have. The United States of Africa and their $1 trillion purchasing power. And how would you play in that space? Well, let me tell you, thanks for asking me. It would take a network, a B1 network, Black First, of Black First who say, well, look, man, we got to come together. And in coming together, there's going to be some type of economic blueprint or you're going to fail. Bottom line. And no, you don't need 40 million African Americans to come together to form said network. But you will need some type of blueprints that are approved by white supremacy. That's a fact. You will have to leverage that system in order to legitimately play in that space. Fact. Because you're going to want some type of international protection of your intellectual property, even though you would essentially be bootlegging your own property. You would be your own bootlegger, but selling your burnt discs in Africa. And instead of the burnt discs, which cost a little bit more, but you can get a pack of 100 and you can ship a pack of 100 CDs or DVDs. That's not expensive at all. Your view, though, says I want to ship these packs of 100 by the pack of 100. 100 of them, 100 of them, 100 of them. Others might think small. They want a different size pallet where they want to stack them up. They say, give me my 100 and a, 5 by the 100. That's 5 spools of 100 DVDs. 100, 100, 100, 100, that's 500. So how many would I need if I go the long way? Now lay that package down. Tower Records, Dimple Records, you're on that hip hop vibe on a global scale, but do it again. And they say, nah, you don't even need that physical property. All you need is the ability to plug and play your information, your data, your video, your JPEG, your image, all of that moving in real time. You just need access to the markets that market might be able to turn it on. And it saves you in that inventory. It saves you in having to transport via the shipping business itself. But me, I say I'll take that adjacency if they only want to create a YouTube content. Maybe they don't want to sell merchandise. Maybe selling cups isn't a conversation for them. Maybe t-shirts and sweaters and other tchotchkes isn't a conversation for them. Maybe that part of the conversation is for the Brandon Tatums, which is why he would have to be added in. If you don't have the capital to invest in it yourself, maybe you would say, well, I can't do that myself. But inside of this fund, I would want to see merchandise. Then you have your backing. Because from a finance lens, what you are asking is, do you have, when it comes to that generational wealth creation, do you have a methodology of accounting? That's the number one question that you would want to ask. You would want to ask about, well, who's going to be the treasurer? That's what you would want to ask. You want white security from a black first perspective. I get that. That's why you want to sign the papers in the first place. That's why you want an insurance. That's why you want, is billing due at the time of delivery? Or is it, at which point is it signed off? Once it leaves me, you own it. Or once it leaves the United States and makes it to Ghana or Kenya. Now you got that conversation with Bro Sanchez TV. You could talk about music and why he feels like that burnt CD and standing outside of a gas station trying to sell it, that was all right. Or you could talk to it with somebody like Brother Ben X, who also has phenomenal music and might take the omni-channel social media marketing route to say, look, I'm not going to sell the burnt CD anymore. I will sell a link. And I will invest in my own personal business to make sure that that link is functioning, that anyone on the continent, here or Africa or in South Americas, even in Europe, could have access to that link. Now, what he needs is a distribution into those markets. And a distribution into those markets requires what Cerulean Gray would need, or would what's that damn word? Advocate for, which is a defense mechanism. Just like you want to be able to defend the receipt of payment. Somebody wants to make a payment for said merchandise. You want to be able to have that go to your bank account. And for that same Nevermore, you're going to need the same things that we have. Those brothers, those underbanked and unbanked, how can they make a payment without going to the white system? Now, I got to admit, I was scrolling through B1 Network content creators when I came across China Fox. I wouldn't be the person who's able to give you more information about who that is. But I digress. If you only want to stick to founding members, I would call it, of the B1 Network, then you would probably say, well, what do I agree or disagree with about Cynthia G? And you would only really disagree if you're still in that position of not being able to argue against the talking points. Because if you were able to argue against the talking points, she calls in. All you got to do is pick up the phone. And if you want more information about the Pan-African side of that argument or that debate, then I would say subscribe to the Dr. Mumbi. But as a consolidation of information that one might have access to, one that would be placed on a device such as a Roku or a Fire Stick, and then the creation of a device or a mechanism that links that Fire Stick to smartphones in Africa, I would say have that conversation with a Dr. Mumbi. But I would also say, if you believe in print media, like DVDs and such, that there is a space for a conversation with the Gab Talk medias, because they can tell you more about the distribution that has successfully worked. Either him or Brother Ben X may be able to tell you about distribution of the Final Call and why that's a viable business product and how that earns a residual and earns some type of money. But then they could also break it down and tell you to go a little bit deeper than that. And they would also say, well, what information is actually being put out? I'm glad you asked, because you could either have that conversation with Irene Yvette or JV Dessalines. JV, I would also include as a part of the founding members of that B1 network. Somebody who I would not say is a founder, but who could also be looked at and have their information critiqued would be the Leo Dunsons of America, who also have a perspective about Pan-Africanism and that whole going back to Africa. They'll tell you about land and all of that shit too. And if you want that whole Pan-African or that I left, then that would be Native Born, who I also subscribe to. Lovely family. A Pan-African that says, well, I don't have to live in America no more. One that can think from a perspective of a multinational enterprise, such as the Nyla says, or the O'Shea Duke Jacksons, who can create platforms of distribution right there in Africa, where your content can or cannot be concluded as relevant, but it can at least make it, and you can invest in yourself to try to get it there and try to get access to those markets. Access that women would relate to, such as the Paris Milans. Can have conversations that women would want to plug in for on their Fire Stick. They might want to listen to Paris Milan when they plug in. They might want to scroll down, and the same way we look at Netflix and look at that, and that's an hour and a half out of our content, they could find that same type of content on our own Roku Fire Stick type device. You already have a network. What does it look like, and what does it look like from a user experience? Now, how do you claim that, and how do you market it? And to which market can you market it to? That would be my second position, that the Pan-African debate in itself, remember, I'm defending Pan-Africanism, even though I'm more of the pro-Black, which is why all these people that you see would particularly fall under pro-Black perspectives, or one that says, yeah, pro-Black has to be right there in the conversation. But let's just project into that. What does Black media look like, and how do you sell it? And if you're not dependent on the white system, then how do Blacks generate one and create it for themselves? And I'm showing you the billions of hours, not millions, the billions of watched hours from Philip Scott. Content made available that already has access into some of those global markets. Some subscribers there in Africa, some subscribers there in America. How does it break down? Man, I was watching a debate, which is how these two made it on there, the Rob Lawrence and the Zion Lex. Phenomenal debate. But the other names that I would also include, because I am going to say name drop all of them in the same manner that I would name drop our ancestors if I was having a true reparations debate. And so I would tell you how I find value in a Renaissance woman. Even in the name, I think that people would click on it. I think that they would click on it. And when I say people, I'm still talking about the diaspora. And I think like Sonetta TV would probably agree. Being able to move it off of YouTube but still have success in selling it is going to be a hell of a skill set, or I did that. That is going to be one hell of a I did that, to be able to say, even when YouTube stopped trying to give me money, I was able to find a complementary source of revenue based off of my YouTube model when I was able to leverage their platform and receive some residual income or an income stream from it, and the ability to sell intellectual property and to do it at scale. And it wasn't the Weather Channel scale, Robert Allen, but you did what you did. And so I say the consolidation of all of that inside of one network, packaged up beautiful, similar to having it on a burnt disc, but it's interactive and able to be packaged as one network, has a greater value, which is why my third and final position would be that bigger in the diaspora is better. Access to a greater market is better than the one that you have here. And for that, never mind, you've already proven that you can leverage that same skill set here in the markets that you do have access to. Search for Uhuru would be somebody who I say is good in that sense because of the information that you spread. Spreading this information not only creates that conduit of, hey, this is Africa, this is what it looks like, these are some places of residence where you can buy if you decided to actually move and be a Pan-African. See, it's the solution built in for those folks who find some utility in a Pan-African versus or pro-Black debate, not versus or. So for those who find that content helpful and say, you know what, I am seeking more information about Pan-African, and when I'm seeking that information, I'm serious. I'm seeking it from the lens of, well, how much does it cost to live there? And in many cases, they could probably find you a dwelling for $1,500, which again, in this debate, we're looking at, can you live off of the interest? $750,000 invested, linked to your social security number as a pro-Black or as an ADOS. What would your monthly stipend be? And living off of the interest, well, it's around $1,500. Could you make that work? Absolutely. Now, what would you do to create your supplemental income? Probably the same thing that you're doing right now, which is the successful dissemination of information. Would you want to live there to do it? Anywhere on the continent of Africa? Probably not. But would you want access to that market? Probably yes. Which means you wouldn't argue with force or violence against either of those perspectives. You would say, well, damn, if they can turn on that market, turn it on. Arguing against it would be against your best interests, because the distribution of intellectual property is biblical. And I can hold the conversation right there, or I could keep it moving and tell you about some of the elders I love as well, like T West Afrosynergy News. One of my favorites today is an elder to me only in age, but also an elder in their complexity of information that they have that I just don't have. And their ability to articulate in a style that resonates with far more people than I connect with, which is Taz Exclusive, has a number of different channels that could play in that same space. So if that final solution that they're talking about with Black media, or why is the B1 network, or why is this even important? If their final question is, show me where that model has worked and show me any of this entire presentation, again, press rewind or do it again. You'll hear how it starts. You'll hear the build. You'll hear the build in slow motion or in fast forward, but you'll hear it. And thus, as a part of that B1 network, I would also have as a subscriber or as somebody on that icon, a clickable link built inside of that, whatever device it is. Again, your purpose is not to continue to only operate under white-owned media. That if your conversation can move into one that recognizes telecommunications in Africa as a viable market for what you do, then you can understand the perplexity of having that conversation with Brother Moses, which is a 40,000-foot view, because I see it in mass. Talk about it from the lens of a continent, reparations. talk about it from the acquisition and the sustaining and the defense of land, labor, and capital. Brother Moses, man, who do I follow the most out of this entire list, or whose content do I consume the most? I'm glad you asked. I do rock with the Yvette Carnells, although I can't watch as many live streams as I would like to watch. The Taz exclusives, I probably watch more content than any of these others, but the House of Consciousness or Sonetta TV would be a top 3. If you wanted the 5, I would include the O'Shea Duke Jacksons as well as the Nyla Says. Those would be my top 5, but I also tune into some content that's dropped by the African Diaspora channel as well as the Dr. Moombies. Every once and so often you'll find me on Instagram, where I'll also go live with brothers like Anthony Brian Logan and see what he has to say. I'll throw him a question or a zinger or two every once in a while, but I don't like to be disruptive for that matter. I can troll sites such as the Young Pharaohs that are out there, as well as troll sites such as the Roland Martins. But I don't much like to troll, and I do like to have conversations. And so I tune in the most with those who have live chat stream capabilities. So not only would we have that interconnectivity on a real-time basis with an interconnected B1 network, as another benefit, you also have access to that link, that live chat. So real-time feedback is probably the best. As a business person investing in a B1 network, and they're saying, well, what marketing opportunity, how can I get my product in the eyes and in the face of more Black people? I would say, well, what market do you want to touch? And I would ask another question about that market. Is that market, are you a believer in race-based marketing or targeted marketing, therefore wanting to attract more Blacks? And then that third one would be, do you want a perspective that is predominantly Black first, or perspectives that have nigga in them? Do you want to hear from a nigga, or are you against a way a nigga sounds? You just know that's a nigga talking right there. And if any of those 3 responses show some interest, then I would say then that is a viable market, that B1 network and those content deliverers who deliver content. Shout out. Next section. See, I could click all of these and make a picture slideshow in PowerPoint, but it'll probably take hella long to be able to execute that command for the computer that I have, which is why not doing this motherfucking Black Friday is hurting me. Maybe Cyber Monday I can get a upgrade to my systems, because naturally that conversation will move right into the actual reparations debate that I've been putting off. Yeah, I think I tried this one, and that's all it does. Honor? Let's talk about that. So only from a lens that recognizes the value of Black bodies can we discuss reparations. Our Black intelligence first. And our ability to execute at the highest levels, even to the judiciary and the oversight committee. What an honor it would be to me to find someone that can debate reparations. Someone who comes with the prerequisite knowledge of our people historically and all that. Who blackness fits like a glove in action, not just in mere words. A brother to civil rights. A comrade like Cooper over the years. That despite incarceration fought to reach new heights in social and economic policy making. A few victories here and there are enough to hold up that black fist, because I know what you're up against. The murder, the rape, the torture of black bodies. Too many tears shed. When the guns in the hood go bop, bop, connected to black hands, white hands and brown, now on the yellow and blue. When everyone shoots, stop looking for who can save, but who wants to shoot you down. Why so many people gather around when black bodies hit the ground? Legacy. Let's talk about that.